This video is sponsored by a lack of sleep, because sometimes you just need a
rip and tear until it is done.
Hello everyone, my name is Tsuki and welcome to my guide to the Astrologian, one of 3 healers currently in Final Fantasy XIV Stormblood. This guide will be aimed mostly at people new to the game or that are still learning the job at a beginner to intermediate level. There will be timestamps in the description and comment section of the video if you would like to skip to a specific section of the guide. Now, before we get started, we have to first tackle a very vital point. How do you actually pronounce Astrologian? Well, Astrologian is a made-up word, so as far as anyone is concerned, you can pronounce Astrologian however you like. But if I ever meet Koji, I'll be sure to ask him. The Astrolopithecus is a healer flexible for its ability to choose to have shields or regen effects tied to some of their key spells, and also for its variety of party support with the use of their cards. While their basic healing toolkit is not much different than the other 2 healers, a lot of their abilities are devoted to the usage and manipulation of their cards and the buffs that they can apply, and we'll be sure to explain all of those within this guide. Now, the first thing I like to do in all of my guides is to go over all the spells and abilities available for you. We'll be looking at each of these as if you are already level 70 and factor in any traits or such that will make these spells and abilities stronger. First off, we have Malefic. This will deal unaspected potency of 150 to an enemy. This will be your basic damage attack that will progressively upgrade and become stronger as you level. You'll be using this to deal single target damage when you do not need to apply your damage over time effects, but your Malefic spells are also unique in that they only have a cast time of 1.5 seconds, whereas other similar spells on the other 2 healers have a 2.5 second cast time. This will leave you with a small window in between casts to briefly reposition yourself or to use your off-global cooldown abilities, of which you have very many of. Malefic's shortened cast time is an extremely valuable tool that you want to try and take advantage of as much as possible. Next is your basic heal, Benefic. This will restore the HP of your target with a potency of 400 and will also have a 15% chance to proc an enhanced Benefic 2 that will be a guaranteed crit. Benefic should be used when your target needs small to moderate amounts of healing. It is also your most MP efficient healing spell, so use it often where you can so that you can conserve your MP. Combust is your only damage over time spell and will place a dot on your target that will deal 40 potency for 18 seconds for a total potency of 240. Combust is also an instant cast spell, which allows for even more time to reposition or use abilities, although you should only be casting this if it needs to be reapplied. Lightspeed is your first utility ability and it will have the MP cost and reduce the cast speeds of all of your spells by 2.5 seconds. This has a cooldown of 2 minutes, but this can also be further shortened by 10 seconds for every use of Essential Dignity while this ability is on cooldown. The cast time reduction of 2.5 seconds will essentially allow you to cast most of your spells instantly while Lightspeed is active, and even spells that have a 3-second cast time such as Aspect to Helios and Gravity will still cast near instantly and can also be casted while moving due to the latency of the game. The only spell that will not have their cast time negated would be Ascend, however, you will still benefit from the halved MP cost and will still be able to cast this much shorter. It goes without saying that Lightspeed is an extremely powerful and versatile tool. This can be great when you need to output a lot of heals in a short period, especially AoE heals, and will also help mitigate the high MP cost of those spells. It can also be used offensively to throw out some gravity spells. Lightspeed is very flexible and can be used in a variety of ways and can also be grouped with other abilities in your toolkit to bolster their effectiveness. Pair it with Cleric Stance if you want to output some strong AoE damage, or pair it with Largesse if during a healing intensive phase if you need to output a lot of healing. Moving along to our next spell, we have our basic AoE heal, Helios. This will heal all party members around you with a potency of 300. Use this when you just need to heal a small amount of HP to your party. Ascend is Astrologian's version of Raise and will allow you to revive a downed party member in a weakened state. People with weakness will receive a 25% reduction to their main stats. Those main stats would be Strength, Intelligence, Dexterity, and Mind. If a person is downed once again and is revived when they already had weakness, they will revive instead with the Brink of Death debuff, which will now reduce their main stats by half. These debuffs will last 2 minutes. It is always preferable to have no deaths at all, but if you are in a position to use Ascend and revive a downed party member, keep in mind the drawbacks. Ascend has a lengthy cast time of 8 seconds and will most likely require you to use your valuable Swift cast ability or for you to focus 8 seconds being immobile and unable to heal while you hard cast this spell. The MP cost of Ascend is also quite high, and once revived, the party member will need a large heal to be safe, so there is a lot of care to be had when deciding to cast this spell. and this applies more to the people receiving the raise, but it is on the player to decide a proper time to accept the raise. Once successfully casted, the player will have 60 seconds to accept the raise at a good opportunity. However, many times people will not think about the timing of their raise and are likely to raise into dangerous AoE attacks and immediately use up their raise immunity. If you're not quick to heal these reckless players, there is a good chance that they will just be downed again and you would have wasted your resources. Ascend is a very tricky spell that requires some smart decision making for both you as the healer and the downed player, so just keep all of this in mind before you decide to cast this spell. Essential Dignity is your first healing ability and it will instantly heal the target with a potency of 400, but this potency will increase the lower the target's HP is, to about a 50% increase in potency while the target is at half HP, and about 1000 potency total when the target is at about 1% HP. This ability has a cooldown of 40 seconds. Once you receive the proper trait at level 68, using Essential Dignity while Lightspeed is on cooldown will further reduce Lightspeed's cooldown by 10 seconds. This ability is extremely amazing and very helpful for helping you add another burst of healing to a person who took a large spike of damage, and also for quickly responding to someone who took unexpected damage. It has a fairly short cooldown of 40 seconds, and I have very little reserve in finding opportunities to use this ability as often as possible, especially since the constant use of it will also help you get your Lightspeed off cooldown faster. However, keep in mind that this is a healing ability and not a spell. This means that certain abilities that increase your outgoing healing potency, such as Largesse or Fey Illumination, or certain abilities that increase a target's incoming heal, such as Convalescence, Nature's Mean, or Defiance, will have no effect on this ability, or any other healing ability for that matter. Benefic 2 will heal a target for 650 potency. You can also have an enhanced Benefic 2 procced by Benefic, one which will guarantee a critical heal. This spell should be used when you need to heal a party member who has taken a moderate to large amount of damage. It is less MP efficient to use than Benefic, but at the times when you need more healing in a shorter amount of time, it is worth the extra MP usage. And in situations where MP does not seem to be an issue, it can be worth foregoing the use of Benefic for this more potent spell to leave more room for casts of damaging spells. Draw is an ability that will allow you to draw one of 6 different cards from your divining deck to use. Once your card has been drawn, it will replace draw on your hotbar until it is used in a variety of ways or until the card wears off after 15 seconds. Draw will not begin its 30-second cooldown until the card drawn is used, wears off, or is discarded. I will discuss draw and all other abilities relating to cards in its own section later in the guide, so let's move on for now. At level 30 you'll learn Diurnal Sect, and at level 50 you'll learn Nocturnal Sect. These will be 2 stances that you'll be able to enter, and choosing which you would like to use will depend on your preferred playstyle and also what would synergize best with your co-healer if there is one. You'll only be able to have one active at a time, and these cannot be switched once you are in battle. Let's talk about Diurnal Sect first. This will reduce the enmity you produce, grant you a 10% increase to your healing spell potency, and will also alter certain spells to have a regen component attached to them. Nocturnal Sect will also reduce the enmity you produce, will grant you a slightly more potent 15% increase to your healing spell potency, and will instead alter certain spells to have a shield component. We'll discuss the spells affected as we continue with this section, and we'll also come back to comparing the 2 sects in the later part of the guide retaining to healing, so let's move along for now. Aspect of Benefic is the first spell that can be affected by having one of the 2 sects active. On its own, Aspect of Benefic is an instant cast spell that will heal a single target for 200 potency. It is pretty insignificant on its own, but with the added effects from one of the 2 sects, it can be a much more hefty supplemental spell. Under Diurnal Sect, Aspect of Benefic will add a regen effect onto the target that will also heal 140 potency every few seconds for a total of 18 seconds. The total potency of this spell will then become 1040. Under Nocturnal Sect, this spell will instead simply add a shield totaling 250% of the heal. I say simply, but this shield is absolutely massive. Compared to Squalor's Adloquium, Nocturnal Aspect of Benefic will be benefiting from the 15% healing potency of the sect, it will cast instantly, and it costs slightly less MP than Adloquium. The shield will be significantly more potent than Adloquium, assuming Adloquium does not crit. And even when Adloquium does crit, a non-critting Nocturnal Aspect of Benefic will still not be too far below in the shield's potency. Even if what I just said sounds like gibberish to you because you're still learning the healer jobs, then the big takeaway from this is that Nocturnal Aspect of Benefic is an amazing spell for handling large spikes of incoming damage. Diurnal Aspect of Benefic, on the other hand, is a nice supplemental tool for when you need to add a little bit of constant healing to a person. However, unlike with regen from White Mage, it is actually a loss in MP per potency to use Diurnal Aspect of Benefic, at least compared to Benefic. Diurnal Aspect of Benefic will still at least heal more than Benefic 2 and will be more MP cost effective, but this is all talk that should be discussed in the MP management portion of the guide, so let's move along for now. Royal Road will allow you to take a drawn card and will expend that card into a stored effect that will alter the next card you use. This sits on a 15-second cooldown. I will discuss Royal Road more in depth later on when we will also discuss the different cards. Spread will allow you to take your currently drawn card and store it away indefinitely in place of the Spread ability. This card will remain in place of your Spread ability until it is used, you switch jobs, or become level synced. Spread will also have a cooldown of 30 seconds, but Spread's cooldown will not begin counting down until the stored card is used or discarded. Spread is an extremely helpful tool. You can save a card for a more opportune moment, save a card until you have your preferred Royal Road effect, or even use it outside of battle or even outside of instance to find the card you want before engaging the boss. As long as you do not level sync down or change your job, your card will stay in your spread even when loading through into another instance. You can use the time you have while waiting to prepare the card you want. Aspect of Helios is the second spell to be affected by having one of the two sects active. On its own, Aspect of Helios will restore the HP of you and your party members around you for a potency of 200. Diurnal Aspect of Helios will additionally add a regen effect that will heal an additional 40 potency every few seconds for 30 seconds. The total potency of this spell will then become 600. This spell is definitely more MP efficient than a normal Helios, and it will heal significantly more over its full duration. Whenever you need to heal a large amount of party-wide damage or constant party-wide damage, casting this first or in a supplemental manner to a Helios or another healing ability is a good choice. Nocturnal Aspect of Helios will reduce the potency to 150 and in turn will add shields that equal 150% of the heal received. These shields will last 30 seconds or until they are broken. As you'd expect, this spell is most effective if able to be casted preemptively before a large or constant party-wide damage goes out. This can take much more fight knowledge and planning to use properly, but it is still a valuable tool for party-wide damage mitigation. Redraw will allow you to take your currently drawn card and replace it back into your deck and attempt to get a newer card. You cannot redraw the same card, so you'll always get something different. This sits on a 30-second cooldown, meaning that it should be available for every draw you use, that is until we start to account for sleeve draw. Again, I will talk about this more in the card section of the guide. Combust 2 will replace Combust at level 46. Combust 2 will instead instantly apply a 30-second damage over time effect that deals 50 potency every few seconds. The total potency will then become 500. Synastry is an extremely powerful and interesting ability and a tool often overlooked by many newer players who pick up Astrologian. This will allow you to place a buff on a party member, and whenever you use any single target healing spells, so long as that party member is within range, they will receive 40% of the heal. This spell is particularly great to use when you want to heal someone other than the main tank that took a lot of damage, but don't want to afford leaving the tank's HP unattended. This is also great in certain fights when both tanks are required to be tanking different enemies and both are in need of healing. And something that the game doesn't actually tell you is that this is actually a pretty potent single target healing ability as well. If you heal the party member who has Synastry themselves, they will still receive the extra 40% of the heal on top of the normal spell, effectively making your single target healing spells 40% more potent. Obviously, this isn't perfect. Abilities are still ineffective, as well as AoE spells. And if you are using Aspect of Benefic, you will still receive the 40% of the initial heal, but the regen or shield will not be amplified in any way. Still, you can make even your normal Benefic spell extremely more potent with this. Synastry is an amazing tool and I encourage you to use it more often. Sometimes using this in place of the largesse when it's unavailable or to save it for a better place is the perfect idea. At level 52, you'll finally receive your first means of dealing with AoE damage in the form of Gravity. This is a targeted spell that will deal 200 potency to your initial target, with a damage drop off for each subsequent enemy that caps at half potency for the 6th enemy onwards. Despite the rather severe sounding damage drop off, this is still a great spell to help your party deal with large packs of enemies, especially in large dungeon pools. Compared to White Mage's Holy, this spell is targeted, which means that you can stay out of harm's way from any potential melee range AoEs. It also has a slightly smaller MP cost, however it does not have a stun component like Holy. Still, if you can squeeze out some gravity casts, especially under the effect of Lightspeed, it will go a long way in making sure that some large pulls go a little faster. Just be watching your MP, and be sure to save some MP for your healing. Malefic 2 will replace Malefic at level 54 and will now deal 180 potency instead. Nothing else to really say about that, it's just a simple damage increase. Time Dilation is an ability that will extend any beneficial effects you've placed on a party member by 15 seconds and has a 90-second cooldown. This is most popularly used to extend the uses of your most potent cards. However, it can also be used to do things such as extend the durations of your regens and even your shields, although the latter is usually not that useful. It can even extend abilities that are not specific to the Astrologian, such as extending the duration of Eye for an Eye. If you can manage to apply all 3 of your regen abilities on the main tank, and maybe even have a card effect given to them as well, this can be used defensively as well as offensively. It is extremely flexible, and you should be looking for opportunities to use it as often as possible to extend the longevity of your utility. Unfortunately, you cannot cast this on yourself. Collective Unconscious is the famous Y'shtola bubble. This will create a bubble around you that will allow any party members who enter to receive a regen effect, and they will also take 10% reduced damage whilst they remain inside. The regen effect will heal for 150 potency every few seconds, and the effect will last for 15 seconds. However, it will continuously refresh the buff to max time every few seconds that you stand within the bubble. The bubble will collapse if you move, turn, or use any other spell or ability. This ability has a 90-second cooldown, and you will also need a sect active to use it, although the effect will remain the same regardless of whichever one is active. Due to how you will be completely restricted from doing any other actions while you maintain the bubble, this ability shines the most during moments of ultimate damage when the party will not be able to target the boss, and you will be waiting for incoming massive party-wide damage. However, this ability is potent enough to warrant sacrificing a few seconds if you know there is going to be a large amount of incoming party-wide damage or constant AoE damage. Even if you are not willing to spend more than a couple seconds maintaining the bubble, you can still use it to instantly apply a fairly potent regen to any nearby party members. In cases where you wouldn't need to use it otherwise, it is also completely valid to move in close to the tank and drop the bubble long enough to apply the regen effect before moving on to casting other things. And whilst in Nocturnal Sect, this will be your only way of applying a regen effect to anyone. Some people even keep the bubble up longer so that the regen will be extended and so the tank can benefit from the 10% damage reduction. I personally don't do this very often, but in cases where you are low on MP and have nothing worth doing otherwise, it can be acceptable to maintain the bubble for longer. This is another ability, like Sinistry, that I would encourage you finding opportunities to use often. It can oftentimes be difficult to have your ally stack in close enough for them to benefit from it, but once you've opened the bubble, most party members will be able to take the hint and move into it after a couple of seconds. Our next ability is Celestial Opposition, another interesting and flexible tool with many uses and plenty of opportunities for amazing synergy with other abilities. This ability has a range of 10 yalms and will apply a 4-second stun to any enemies within range, great for some momentary damage mitigation. More importantly though, it shall extend the beneficial effects you've cast on yourself and party members in range by 10 seconds. This obviously includes cards, but also everything we discussed earlier with Time Dilation. But unlike Time Dilation, this also affects yourself, and you can use this to extend basically any ability that has a duration. This includes Light Speed, Largesse, Surecast, Cleric Stance, Lucid Dreaming, Eye for an Eye. You can even extend the use of Sinistry as long as you ensure that your Sinistry's target has their half of the buff extended as well. Most Astrologians will use this to extend the uses of their cards, particularly when they can get an offensive card with the Expanded Royal Road effect. However, there are many ways to further take advantage of this ability, in so many ways that it would take far too long to list all of them. I'd highly recommend trying to always pair this with Lucid Dreaming, in the least, as this will extend the MP refresh by a large amount, and with both having a 2-minute cooldown, this will pair very nicely with it. Lightspeed also has a 2-minute cooldown, and you can essentially bolster your healing capabilities or offensive capabilities while also regaining MP depending on how you stack these abilities together. Need to do a lot of healing? Throw up Largesse, Lightspeed, Sinistry if you want it, and Lucid Dreaming, and then pop Celestial Opposition, and you'll be throwing out extra potent heals, extra fast, and for half MP while regaining MP. Want to go out and spam a lot of AoE damage, throw out some offensive cards, use Cleric Stance, Lightspeed, Lucid Dreaming, and then Celestial Opposition, and you'll essentially be able to spam Gravity for 20 seconds for half MP under Cleric Stance while also regaining MP. Now, these combinations of abilities sound really enticing, but it's important to note that while you can extend the benefits of these abilities, sometimes using so many of them in one big burst is not always a necessity, and it can be much more sensible to save some of them and spread them out so that you always have options available to you later on. It is also worth mentioning that Celestial Obfuscation does extend other things as well. It can, funnily enough, extend how long your drawn card will remain before wearing off, although you should probably not be holding on to it for quite that long. It can also, funnily enough, extend the incubation period of Earthly Star, which is the next ability we'll talk about now. Earthly Star is the first Stormblood ability you'll have access to at level 62. This will allow you to place down a field, and doing so will grant you the Earthly Dominance buff. This buff will last for 10 seconds and will allow you to use Stellar Detonation where your Earthly Star is on your hotbar. The placed field will then explode, dealing 150 potency to all the enemies inside the field, while also healing all party members inside the field for 540 potency. However, if you maintain Earthly Dominance for more than 10 seconds, the buff will instead change to Giant Dominance, and using Stellar Detonation now will deal 200 potency of damage to the enemies inside the field, and will now heal party members for 720 potency. Giant Dominance will last for 10 seconds, and if you do not manually use Stellar Detonation before this wears off, it will automatically explode once the time runs out. Earthly Star has a cooldown of 60 seconds, and it will actually begin cooling down as soon as you put down the field. This ability might sound a little bit complicated, but in simpler terms, it is a time bomb that deals damage to enemies and heals the party for a massive amount, assuming everyone is within the field. If you allow the bomb to sit for more than 10 seconds, it becomes even more powerful. This is a great tool for dealing a little bit of damage, but more importantly, healing a massive amount of HP. The size of the field is extremely generous, and if you place this down beforehand to deal with upcoming party-wide damage, this ability alone can apply a potent enough heal that you might not even need to cast anything other than this one ability. Of course, this does take a little bit of fight knowledge, and some planning and foresight to pull off effectively if you want to get the more powerful Earthly Star. But in cases where you weren't able to prepare beforehand, even just setting this down right before incoming damage and detonating it in its initial form can still be extremely potent. This being an ability, it will not benefit from things like largesse or the passive healing spell potency from your sect, but even 540 potency in its weakest form is still a massive amount of healing, and when you can plan ahead and have an Earthly Star ready for big spikes of damage, it'll feel really satisfying. At level 64, Malefic 3 will replace Malefic 2 and will now deal 220 potency. Pretty straightforward upgrade, so let's just move on. Minor Arcana will allow you to take your currently drawn card to receive either the Lord of the Crowns or the Lady of the Crowns. We'll talk about this ability more and those two cards in the cards section of the guide. And your final ability on Astrologian is Sleeve Draw. This will grant you a random card in your draw, spread, and minor arcana slots if you do not already have cards in those slots. You will also receive a random Royal Road effect if you do not already have one. This ability sits on a 2-minute cooldown. And with the introduction of this ability, we've covered all of the Astrologian specific spells and abilities, and I think this is a good time to transition into the card section of the guide and bring back up a lot of abilities that we glossed over in this section. Okay, we'll first talk about the cards you can obtain by using Draw. Like we discussed earlier, when using Draw, one of these 6 cards will replace Draw on your hotbar and will remain there until used in some way or until the card wears off after 15 seconds. We'll first talk about the Balance, which is arguably the most powerful and most desired card of the original 6. This will very simply increase the attack power of the party member you place it on by 10% and will last for 30 seconds by default. It really doesn't need much more explanation than that. This card is best given to your hardest hitting party members who are outputting the most DPS. The next card is the Bull. This will reduce the damage taken by a party member by 20% and lasts for 30 seconds. I feel like this card is fairly underrated as most Astrologians just want to fish for the offensive cards. As far as defensive utility goes, this is an extremely powerful card. This card, even without any extensions or Royal Road effects, acts as a longer lasting rampart, and it can be particularly useful when you need a little bit more breathing room and your tank is low on defensive cooldowns. It is also extremely strong when reducing damage during large pulls in dungeons. Next is the Arrow. This will decrease the cast and recast time of your skills and spells, and will also reduce the delay of your auto attacks, and will last for 30 seconds. This card is mostly used offensively. Similarly to the Balance, this will be best given to your hardest hitting DPS, but if given some close options, I tend to prioritize giving the Arrow to casters, namely Black Mages, as it allows to get their cast off with a little more ease. However, since the Arrow also decreases auto attack delay, giving this to a well-performing melee DPS is still a completely sensible choice. The arrow is primarily used offensively, however you can use this a bit more defensively as well by giving it to yourself to allow yourself to cast your healing spells a little more quickly. In the majority of situations, however, this card is still best used in an offensive manner. The fourth card is the Spear. This will increase the critical hit rate of your chosen party member and will last for 30 seconds. This card is primarily an offensive card, however its effects are less tangible than the balance or the arrow. Still, it theoretically should increase the DPS of whomever you give it to. With the Spear, I find it most effective to prioritize giving these to jobs that benefit the most from crits, namely bards and monks. If you do not have any in your party, or the ones you do have are underperforming, you can simply give this to your best DPS once again. Moving on to more utility cards now, and we start with the Uer. This will place a 50 potency refresh on a party member that lasts for 15 seconds. This should total up to about 3000 MP at level 70. This card is very occasionally useful. The only party members you should ever really bother using this card on are the healers, and that is really only if you or your co-healer is struggling with maintaining their MP. Otherwise, the most appropriate thing to do when drawing the Uer is to channel it into Royal Road or Minor Arcana, or attempt to draw something else. You could maybe try and use it on your bard to get out some more faux Requiem, but I highly doubt that's worth it. And you shouldn't ever try and place this on a Dark Knight, as Dark Side prevents any MP regen effects, and Dark Knights have their own tools to regain their MP. And lastly, we have the Spire. This will regen the TP of your chosen party member for 15 seconds. This card is absolutely terrible, and you should just consider it as fodder for Royal Road or Minor Arcana. The TP you regain from this card is not very significant, and due to the changes to the roll action system in patch 4.4, all melee DPS should have access to Goad, and all ranged DPS should have access to Tactician, so there are better options available for restoring TP. Not to mention that the TP is only ever an issue when forced to perform AoE skills for too long. Where the Uer does have some merits, the Spire does not, and should be either used to channel Royal Road or Minor Arcana, or just discarded altogether. Having talked about the original 6 cards now, it is time to now discuss Royal Road. Royal Road will allow you to essentially take your currently drawn card and sacrifice its use to instead gain a Royal Road effect that will affect the next card you use. Royal Road does have a 15-second cooldown, and while it should theoretically be available for each draw usage, Sleeve Draw does throw a little wrinkle into that. So there may be times where you cannot Royal Road right away, so just keep that in mind. So what are the available effects that you can gain with Royal Road? Should you channel the Balance or the Bull, you will get the Enhanced Royal Road effect. This will increase the effect of your next card by 50%. If you channel the Arrow or the Spear, you'll get the Extended Royal Road effect. This will double the duration of your next card. And if you channel the Uer or the Spire, you'll get the Expanded Royal Road effect. This will have the effect of your next card, but in exchange will allow you to give the card's effect to all nearby party members. Now, when I made my guide back in Heavensward, I explained how I compared the different effects of Royal Road with the measurement of effectiveness. I know, super creative, but it does get the point across. So let's calculate that here again. We'll go ahead and use everyone's favorite card, the Balance, as an example. Should you use the Balance without any effects, it will have its original effect, which will last for 30 seconds. So we'll say that using this card this way, we'll be using the card at 30 effectiveness. Now, should you choose, you can now extend the use of the card with Time Dilation and Celestial Opposition. This will increase the card's duration by 25 seconds, and it will now become 55 effectiveness. Now let's take into account some Royal Road effects. Should we use the Balance with the Enhanced effect, we will now be increasing the potency of its buff by 50%. So now 30 seconds multiplied by 1.5 will now be 45 effectiveness. Should we choose to extend the Balance now, each second will be now multiplied by 1.5. So adding those 25 seconds to our already 30 seconds, the Balance now has an effectiveness of 82.5. Now let's try out the Extended effect. This simply acts as another time extension, so now doubling the duration of the Balance simply doubles its effectiveness to 60, slightly higher than the Enhanced Balance, but it's stretched out over double the time, which could leave more room for combat inactivity. If we further extend the Balance with Time Dilation and Celestial Opposition, again its simple addition now becomes 85 effectiveness. And now, things can get a little bit more complicated when we try to account for the Expanded Royal Road effect. First off, we do need to take into account that there are two different party sizes. Since we are now having the effect of the balance, we can now calculate effectiveness by the total seconds of the card's duration given to everyone, and then multiplying that by 0.5. We'll look at light parties first, which consist of 4 people. If you take the expanded balance and can manage to ensure all 4 party members are receiving it, altogether each party member will be contributing half of a normal balance. Altogether, we can calculate that to 60 effectiveness. We can then extend the effects of these cards. We can give the time dilation to one of our DPS, which will increase the total effectiveness to 67.5. And now, with the Celestial Opposition, we can go ahead and extend all 4 cards by 10 seconds. This will increase our effectiveness to 87.5. This is only slightly higher than using the balance with the other 2 effects. But now we can look at a full party, which does change things. If we hit all 8 party members with the balance, that is a total of 240 seconds between all 8 people, which is 120 effectiveness. Now increase one of our DPS with time dilation, that goes up slightly to 127.5, and then extend all 8 party members with Celestial Opposition to add an additional 80 seconds total, and altogether we have an effectiveness of 167.5. Much higher than using the enhanced or extended balance in terms of effectiveness. So let's recap. All of the numbers are on screen now, and if all that math wasn't very sensible, then in simpler terms, the enhanced Royal Road effect is the weakest effect, but it is ideal for when you need to deal more damage in a shorter period. The extended Royal Road effect is slightly better, but it has a longer duration. And the expanded Royal Road effect in a light party is slightly better than that, on paper at least. The expanded Royal Road effect in a full party does seem to be the best option. Now of course, this is all really just how things are in a vacuum and on paper, especially when it comes to the expanded Royal Road effect. The expanded Royal Road is really only useful when using offensive cards. You could make an argument for the Bull, but in most situations the Bull would not be necessary on the entire party. You must also remember that we are counting healers into the effectiveness calculations, and even if you are a healer who will apply DPS when you don't need to heal, you will still ultimately have to spend a good portion of a fight healing, and will be unable to take the benefit of the balance in this case. The arrow and the spear do have some effect on your healing at least, but since we're using the balance for this example, it does nothing to improve your healing capabilities. Ultimately, each Royal Road effect has its uses. Even the enhanced Royal Road effect that is quote-unquote the worst effect still is extremely powerful. The enhanced and extended effects are particularly great when you have 1 or 2 DPS who are performing far above everyone else for you to focus your cards on. The expanded effect is okay in a light party, and it is extremely powerful in a full party as long as the entire party is performing their jobs adequately. Now, despite all the time we spent talking about Royal Road, there will simply just be times where you just want to use a card in its bare default form, and that's perfectly fine. There will be times when you simply draw a card and just want to use it, and you don't have time to fish for a Royal Road effect, or you don't want to fish for a Royal Road effect, and the base card will simply just be enough for the moment. So, in those cases, it is perfectly fine to use a card without using Royal Road. You do not always need to go out of your way to make sure that you have a Royal Road effect before using a card, so just keep that in mind. Now, we spent a little while on Royal Road and even had a little math session there, so let's switch gears a little bit and talk about a few other things before we move on to role actions. The next thing I want to discuss is Minor Arcana. Like I mentioned earlier, Minor Arcana allows you to access 2 new cards that were added in Stormblood. In order to gain access to these cards, you must channel your currently drawn card into the Minor Arcana ability. Once you do this, Minor Arcana will be replaced with either the Lord of the Crowns or the Lady of the Crowns. Similarly to Spread, you can keep whichever card you obtain indefinitely until you decide you want to use it. Minor Arcana will cooldown once the card has been used, but it only has a 1-second cooldown now. Let's talk about the 2 available cards that you can get through Minor Arcana. The Lord of the Crowns is a single target damage ability that will deal 300 potency to the target. This is fairly straightforward. It deals damage. You really shouldn't have any issue finding a place to use this. Usually I almost immediately end up using it myself. I suppose if you really want to, you could save it in case there might be a certain phase where you might want the extra boost in DPS, but I never really end up holding onto this card for very long myself. The Lady of the Crowns is a single target healing ability that will heal your target for 500 potency. Unlike the Lord, this card is worth holding onto. You can essentially keep this card as insurance in case you might need a quick heal and you don't have access to Essential Dignity or Light Speed. Now, when it comes to minor arcana, there really isn't much harm in holding on to either card for as long as you want. Should you happen to draw a card that you do not want to use, spread, royal road, or you don't want to discard it either, you can quickly use whatever is in your minor arcana and replace it with whatever's in your draw slot rather than discarding the card. The only issue with doing this is if you have a preference for keeping either card, there is a 50% chance that you won't get it back. So in some cases, it might be better to simply discard the card instead. Which reminds me, I skipped over them earlier, but there is an ability to discard the card you've drawn, to discard the card in your spread slot, or to get rid of your current Royal Road effect. It's a pain to fit them on your hotbar, but there will be occasions where you'll want to do these very things, so do find some place to put them. Next, I would like to return to Sleeve Draw. Sleeve Draw will automatically give you a random card in your draw, spread, and minor arcana slots, if there isn't something in those slots already. It will also give you a random Royal Road effect if you do not already have one. Sleeve Draw is particularly great for attempting to get the card you want for the moment. If you use draw and redraw and still don't get what you want, you can get rid of whatever is in your draw slot and try a third time with Sleeve Draw. Or, alternatively, you could draw something, use it, and then immediately draw again with Sleeve Draw. Again, you won't have to worry about Sleeve Draw overriding whatever you might have stored in your spread or your minor arcana or whatever Royal Road effect you might have. These will not override those effects if you already have something you already like. If you want to only use this to try and get another decent card from your draw slot, and only that, I'd consider that acceptable. Obviously, if you can manage to, it is the most benefit to try and get all 4 effects at once, but if you only need 1 or 2 effects, it is much better to use Sleeve Draw without just sitting on Sleeve Draw and potentially losing out on Sleeve Draw uses throughout a fight. I'd highly recommend trying to use Sleeve Draw immediately after draw. This keeps draw lined up nicely, especially with redraw, and if you don't end up using redraw with draw first, you'll have it available for Sleeve Draw and it will still be lined up fairly close to your next draw. I hope this isn't really confusing with how often I'm saying different abilities that all have the word draw in it, but there really isn't really a better way of explaining things. Now, one penultimate topic I'd like to bring up in this section is a rather important one to me, and that is to give your cards to good players, not jobs. What do I mean by that? Well, very simply, be keeping an eye on your party members and avoid giving your cards to those who are performing poorly. The way the math works out, when it comes to using your offensive cards, the more DPS a party member is doing, the more DPS they'll gain from a DPS buff. The less DPS someone is doing, the less they'll get out of the same buff. So give your cards to good players and not just the jobs that you'll assume are outputting the most damage. Now, to be fair, it's not always easy to tell who is doing the most DPS, I do get that. If you play on PC and have access to a parser, that can make things a little bit more simple by simply following the numbers, but if you do not want to use one or play on PS4 and don't have access to one, then the best way to determine if a DPS is performing well is to, well, pay attention to them. And that can sound exhausting, and if you are still new to the game or new to healing, it might not be a very easy task to pay attention to the smaller details while also trying to heal the party and keep up with your own job's mechanics. But perception is a huge part of being a good healer, and it's something you should practice. Ever since Stormblood has been introduced with the addition of job gauges, there is a lot of telltale information that you will not be able to see anymore that you previously could to tell you if someone is at least playing their job well on a basic level. Some of these cues are things such as buff maintenance and debuff maintenance. Simple things like heavy thrust, straight shot, twin snakes, etc. should be attempted to be kept up 100% of the time. Another thing to see is if they are applying their debuffs. There aren't many dots left in the game, so it's pretty easy to tell if a DPS is neglecting their one and only dot on a boss fight. Also paying attention to their rotation. If you're in the duty finder and you see a Dragoon without heavy thrust who is only using their full thrust combo over and over, I would generally avoid giving cards to them. Similarly, if there's a Black Mage using Fire 3 over and over again, I would still try to avoid giving cards to them. There's a lot of things that can let you know if a player is not performing well, and in that case, you would do well to try and focus your cards on the DPS who are doing well. And I really can't stress this enough. It is a huge pet peeve of mine to see Astrologians throw their cards to party members who aren't even playing their job right on a basic level. When it comes to the DF especially, there are many players who do not perform well, no matter what the reason may be. Maybe it's because they're new to the game, maybe it's because they're trying to learn a new job and they don't quite have a handle on it, or maybe they just don't care and they just want to press buttons. It really doesn't matter. If there are people who are not performing well, you should try to avoid giving your cards to them. One of the jobs I personally play a lot is the Bard, which does not generally deal the most DPS compared to the other jobs, but I've managed to out DPS 14 other DPS in Alliance raids before while playing Bard, just because I'm playing my job properly where others are not. This may come off of something as a personal peeve, but if there's anything I want you to take away from this guide, it is to please give your cards to good players who are doing well, and not to jobs who can output the most DPS, or the jobs whom I said I prefer to give certain cards to, or even to your friends. I just ran a dungeon the other day where the Astrologian kept giving all the cards to his Dragoon buddy, and I was still outperforming him on my Samurai without any cards, which makes no mathematical sense, but look, just please give cards to good players who are doing well. Heck, even if the tank happens to be doing more DPS than the DPS, which it happens sometimes, I've been in runs where it happens, I would still give my cards to the tank over the DPS in that situation. And you know, when you're playing with random people through the Duty Finder especially, you're going to run into all sorts of people with varying levels of skill, so it happens, alright? Sometimes you get DPS who don't know what they're doing, you get players who don't know what they're doing, and just try to pay attention as best as you can so that you can make the most out of your cards. When it comes to Astrologian, you draw the cards, you hand them out, but it is actually on your party to make the most of those cards. So try to give them to the party members who will make the most of those cards. Okay, we went on a little rant there. I do apologize, but there is still one final note I would like to end off this section with, and that is, when it comes to Astrologian, cards are a huge part of the job, but a good Astrologian will be able to get through a fight and support the party no matter what kind of cards they get. There are a lot of abilities dedicated to your cards and manipulating them, and even with all of those cards and all of those abilities, there are still times where RNG just won't be kind to you, and you'll get bad cards. You will go long streaks without getting any of the cards that you really want. And while it can be frustrating, just remember that you still have a decent and consistent healing toolkit, and to just make the most of what you get from your cards. Some runs will be bad. It happens when you're dealing with RNG naturally. Sometimes there will just be times where it feels like it's just against you, and it happens. But no matter what, if you're a good Astrologian and you can keep on top of what consistent tools that you do actually have access to, you should be able to make it through any fight, no matter what kind of cards you end up drawing. So just keep that in mind. Alrighty, now I would like to go ahead and talk about the 10 role actions that you'll have access to as a healer. As of patch 4.4, you can now take all 10 of these at once. Have fun fitting them on your hotbar, although there are certainly some that you might skip out on. Really, it's just one spell though, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get down to it and talk about each one. The first role action is Cleric Stance. This will grant you a small 5% buff to your attack potency with spells. This lasts for 15 seconds and has a 90-second cooldown. This is a small but still noticeable increase to your damage output, and you should use it when you are able to output large amounts of damage. The next one is Break. This will deal damage with a potency of 50 and will also add a heavy effect to the target. This spell is completely pointless and I do not bother taking it. There were times in the past where being able to heavy a target was an ideal choice for during certain parts of raids, however those occasions were still very far and few between, and should the need arise to use heavy again, ranged DPS are much more suited to handling such a task and without wasting a GCD to boot. Protect will form a 30-minute barrier around you and your party members around you and will increase your magic and physical defense. It goes without saying that this should be casted on all party members before a pull and should be maintained throughout an instance if it shall last longer than 30 minutes. And if a party member should go down and you choose to revive them, they'll need to have Protect reapplied to them. This is a smart decision in the long run to help ensure that they have a little bit of extra protection, but if you have higher priorities, then I would recommend holding off on recasting this at the moment. Thankfully, because of patch 4.4, you should always have access to Protect, and Protect does not cost MP. It still does take a cast to reapply though, so just keep that in mind. Isuna will remove a single detrimental effect from the target. This spell can be absolutely mandatory and essential for properly handling some mechanics, so be sure to make note of the fights that require you to dispel certain debuffs. When it comes to more general effects, there's a little more thought that can go into casting this. If you don't think the debuff is that severe, you can choose to ignore it. An example being, if it is a weak poison, you can just opt to just heal through it instead. Lucid Dreaming will have your enmity and will grant you a refresh effect that will replenish your MP over 21 seconds. This sits on a 2-minute cooldown. The MP regained from this ability is not immediately clear, however at level 70 it should be 960 MP every few seconds, which totals up to 6720 MP. As an Astrologian, you can also extend the duration of Lucid Dreaming with the use of Celestial Opposition, and this will increase Lucid Dreaming's duration to 31 seconds, further adding another 3 ticks of MP, and this will total up to 9600 MP instead. I'd highly recommend trying to pair your Lucid Dreaming with Celestial Opposition every single time, as Lucid is your sole way of regaining MP other than the use of the Ur card. I recommend using this ability when you're around 2/3 to half of your MP, and periodically using it throughout a fight to keep your MP reserves up. Swift Cast will allow you to instantly cast your next spell and sits on a 60-second cooldown. This ability is extremely helpful and versatile. A popular use is to use it to negate the lengthy cast time of Ascend to revive a downed party member, however you should not be holding this in reserve for that one occasion. There are plenty of times when using Swift Cast is extremely optimal. It is particularly helpful when you need to quickly output a heal or need to do so while moving or while under both of those conditions. Thankfully, if Swift Cast is on cooldown, you do have the option of using Lightspeed instead, and vice versa. Eye for an Eye will place a 20-second buff on a party member. When that party member is attacked, there is a 20% chance that the attacker will receive a debuff in return that will lower their damage by 10% for 10 seconds. This ability has a 3-minute cooldown. This ability is nice, but before it was hindered by the fact that it was so RNG gated that I would usually opt for other role actions. Now that you can take all 10, I find myself using it a lot more often. It is especially great in large dungeon pulls where the tank will be attacked constantly by multiple enemies for the effect to trigger. However, it can also be used in boss fights, although it is still very likely that the effect will not trigger at all in those occasions. Its strength certainly lies in mitigating a small bit of damage during large pulls. Also note that you can extend the time of this buff with the use of Time Dilation and Celestial Opposition. Largesse will increase the healing potency of your spells by 20% for 20 seconds and sits on a 90-second cooldown. This is an amazing ability for outputting larger heals and is especially useful in damage-intensive phases for both single target and party-wide damage. This ability can be extended with the use of Celestial Opposition in case 20 seconds isn't enough somehow. Surecast will place a 5-second buff on you that will ensure that your spellcast cannot be interrupted. This sits on a 30-second cooldown. It will also prevent most knockback and draw-in effects, which is extremely valuable in quite a few pieces of recent content. Using Surecast to prevent annoyances that may interrupt your casts or disrupt your positioning to ensure that you can stay on top of your heals is something that I highly encourage, especially with the abundance of knockback and draw-in effects in Stormblood content. And the final role action ability is Rescue. This nifty little ability will allow you to pull a party member to your position. In theory, this could be used to rescue a party member who is being dumb and standing in a bad spot where they could get hit or die. In practice, it takes far too much effort and time to notice someone standing in a poor position, target them, and then use rescue and have them pull to you in time to actually save them. Ironically enough, rescue is mostly just used to pull pranks and troll others by purposely putting them in harm's way or pulling them off the edge of the arena. There may be mechanics or certain strategies where using rescue in a planned manner may be a viable thing to do, but attempting to use rescue for its intended purpose just does not work very well in practice. So I would say that it is okay to forego placing this ability on your hotbar, although I can't say it is quite as useless as break. And that is all the role actions available to you. Most of them have their uses and are worth taking, so get to fixing your hotbars to find a comfortable spot for all of them. Alright, so with all of the spells and abilities squared away, let's talk about a handful of important things, starting with Overhealing. Overhealing is the act of healing for more than the missing HP of a party member. Doing this often will result in a large amount of wasted MP, as well as the buildup of unnecessary enmity. Now, to be fair, whilst having one of your two sects active, you'll naturally be generating less enmity than the other healers. However, it is still good practice to not overheal too often, especially as to not waste too much MP. Overhealing will occur at times, it just happens, and sometimes it's worth wasting a bit of spell to ensure that a party member is at full HP for the next mechanic, but you definitely want to try and limit how often this occurs. The next thing I want to discuss is Precasting. This is the act of preemptively casting a spell so that the heal lands as soon as the damage is taken. This is especially helpful when dealing with party-wide damage or large tank busters. The mindset behind this is a bit more suited to when you are using Diurnal Sect, as using shields in Nocturnal Sect can see more benefit in casting spells before damage has the chance to occur, so that the damage is actually soaked in by the shield. But for more general spell casting, Precasting is a helpful skill to learn. Many large attacks will have cast bars or specific animations tied to them to cue you in to when large damage is coming. It's important to be able to see this and respond to them accordingly. Being able to precast your spells will help you stay on top of your healing. And lastly, in this section I want to talk about Stutter stepping. This is the act of moving just before a spell is finished casting to gain a little bit of movement, and due to the latency, your spell will still finish its cast. This is an extremely helpful skill to learn, as it can help you gain a little extra bit of mobility to reposition yourself if you need to. Generally, you can get most spells to about 85 to 90% finished before you can start to move. This is a helpful skill to employ, but it does come with its own risks. If the spell you are casting is vital to the survival of a party member, and you mess up and move too soon, then it can be fairly devastating. However, once you are comfortable with the maneuver, it becomes a lot easier to pull off consistently. I myself only occasionally mess up and break my cast, and the extra mobility this skill allows is worth taking the time to learn in my opinion. Okay, now let's get into some healing techniques. We'll start first with single target healing. One thing to make note of is that I highly recommend that regardless of your preferred sect, I recommend trying to ensure that you switch to Nocturnal Sect in between pulls to add a Nocturnal aspected benefit to the tank. The shield granted is absolutely massive as we discussed earlier, and it is rather painless to switch between sects and cast this spell since it is instant cast. The only issue you might come across is that if you cast this spell when the tank has already initiated contact with the enemy, then you will be considered in battle and will not be able to switch back to Diurnal Sect if that is your preferred sect. Just be mindful of how close you are to your incoming enemies so that this doesn't happen too often. With an extremely potent shield on the tank, it is now up to you to choose whether or not you would like to stay in Nocturnal or switch to Diurnal. Comparing the two, they are both powerful in their own way, and in a light party it is completely up to your preference which you would like to use more. The regions of Diurnal can offer more consistent healing to open up longer opportunities to deal DPS, whereas the massive shields of Nocturnal can be a bit more tricky to use properly to soak damage, but offer extremely potent defensive options. It's also worth noting, should you choose to stick with Diurnal Sect, you will not have any spells or abilities for preventing large spikes of damage other than Collective Unconscious. In full parties, you can instead opt to trust the damage prevention of the tank busters to your co-healer, but in light parties, you should keep that in mind and opt for a precasting approach. Most light party content should not have any tank busters that can drop a tank to 0 HP from a single hit, as long as they are fairly healthy, and tanks themselves should have their own tools for damage mitigation. For this scenario, let's stick with healing in Nocturnal Sect for now. Your healing spells will be slightly more potent due to Nocturnal's slightly higher passive healing buff, but the biggest feature of Nocturnal Sect certainly has to be the massive shield attached to aspected benefit. Use this before a big spike in damage and you can feel pretty at ease knowing that a huge amount of that damage will be soaked in by the shield. In large pulls where the tank is taking a lot of constant damage, casting this spell will pretty much be able to halt incoming damage for a short while, making you feel like you've somehow managed to stun the group of enemies. Of course, you don't want to use aspected benefit too often as it costs a lot of MP. You should be falling back onto benefit and benefit too often. Compared to their counterparts on White Mage, these spells cost slightly less MP while healing a similar amount once taking into account the healing buffs granted by your sects. While Benefic is the best choice for small to moderate amount of damage, it is also the best for conserving MP. You can opt to allow your tank to dip a little lower in HP and use Benefic 2 instead if you would like. This is a bit riskier and less MP efficient, but it can open up more casts for you to output more DPS yourself. So in areas where you feel confident in your ability to allow your tank's HP to dip a little lower and you don't think you have any issues with MP, this can be a viable method to use. For myself personally, I usually open with a Nocturnal aspected benefit, and this shield should last long enough for me to throw out some DPS spells. Once the shield breaks, I gauge how much damage the tank is taking. If it isn't too severe, I either wait until the tank needs some healing to begin casting my benefit spells, or I cast another aspected benefit to open up a longer window for me to deal a little bit more DPS. In cases where the tank is taking a large amount of damage and you are struggling to keep up, this is where you can also use an aspected benefit to essentially halt the damage the tank is taking for a moment to buy you some time to get off some benefit 2 casts. If you find yourself needing more healing power, you can opt to use Largesse or Sinistry. Sinistry in particular is much more useful in Nocturnal since your healing spells are slightly more potent. Switching gears a bit, let's talk about healing in Diurnal. As I said before, I highly recommend that you try to switch to Nocturnal in between pulls for the shield before switching back to Diurnal. Once the pull begins, you'll have a potent shield to allow your tank to position properly and for you to deal some DPS. Once that shield is broken, then you have some options laid out. Diurnal Aspect of Benefic is great for having a nice constant heal on the tank, and this can allow you a much longer window for dealing DPS if that damage the tank is taking isn't too severe. It is more MP efficient to use than Benefic 2 at least, however, Benefic is still the best and most MP efficient spell to use. While healing in Diurnal, I still tend to try and keep uptime on my Aspect of Benefic, but it still isn't nearly as powerful or MP efficient as White Mage's regen, so you should keep a watchful eye on your MP if you want to try and keep this up as often as possible. You can use largesse to bolster the regen effect of Aspect of Benefic, and while you can use Sinistry for single target healing, note that you'll only gain the extra 40% healing potency on the initial heal of Aspect of Benefic and not on the 40% increase on regen ticks. Now while it is completely your preference which sect you would like to use in a light party, when it comes to a full party there are some things you should probably keep in mind. First off is that you should try to diversify yourself so that no matter what, you are the opposite of your co-healer. So in this case, if you have a Scholar, it would be more beneficial for you to be in Diurnal. If you have a White Mage, it would be more beneficial for you to be in Nocturnal. Of course, you can, if you want, overlap a little bit if you'd like. It is completely okay if you want to go Nocturnal with Scholar, or if you want to go Diurnal with White Mage. I would feel like Diurnal with White Mage is a little more acceptable, but for the most part, you want to try not to overlap with what your co-healer is already able to do, especially in the case of White Mage and Scholar. When it comes to healing with another Astrologian, however, you do want to try and be in the opposite sect of whatever your other Astrologian is in. The reason for this is because, for whatever reason, despite the fact that regens will stack between two White Mages, two Diurnal Aspected Benefics will not stack, and neither will Nocturnal Aspected Benefic shields. So just keep that in mind, try to be in the opposite sect if you are healing with another Astrologian, and just generally speaking, try to be in a different sect to whatever your co-healer strength is. If it is a Scholar, try to be in Diurnal. If it is a White Mage, consider being a Nocturnal, although I feel like Diurnal and White Mage can work well together, much better than Nocturnal and Scholar for any case. So just keep that in mind. Now let's get into some more general tips regardless of the sect you choose. Essential Dignity is an amazing tool for helping you catch up on healing or for healing someone who took unexpected damage. Like we discussed earlier, it does get more potent the less HP a party member is missing, but I would not go out of my way to wait until someone is almost dead before trying to use it. I simply use it if someone is missing a decent chunk of HP and I would rather not take the time to cast a normal Benefic spell. This will also help with reducing Lightspeed's cooldown if it is currently cooling down. Similarly, if you happen to have a Lady of the Crown saved in your Minor Arcana, it behaves in a very similar way, although I tend to prioritize using Essential Dignity first, as it does have a longer cooldown and has more benefits than Lady of the Crowns. For large pulls, where there are lots of enemies, or just boss fights in general, if you will not need the AoE healing power of Earthly Star for a specific mechanic, then I recommend using this on cooldown. Adds a little bit of damage, and since you're unlikely to be stressed for time, you can usually allow Earthly Star to incubate properly and get the biggest potency possible. Even if you're not using this for a party-wide heal, having this available in large pulls is a nice bit of extra damage to all of the enemies in the field, and it is also a nice chunky heal to the tank as well. In boss fights, the damage is less noticeable, but the heal is still helpful and can help prolong the need for you to cast healing spells if timed right. Also, if you do not need Collective Unconscious for a large amount of party-wide damage either, which tends to be fairly rare in light party content especially, then you can opt to get close to the tank to apply the regen effect before dropping the shield again. This regen is fairly strong and can be extended further with time dilation and celestial opposition. This is your only regen heal available in Nocturnal Sect, and in Diurnal, you can stack Aspect of Benefic and even Aspect of Helios to have 3 different regens on the tank to further extend each one with your time extensions. However, I would not really go out of your way to cast Aspect of Helios just to take advantage of this, and doing so would most likely just be overkill as it would result in a massive amount of overhealing in the end. Now, in cases where you may need to heal someone other than the tank, or in fights where both tanks are in need of healing, there are some things to keep in mind. If you need to divert your attention from the main tank, ensure that you can do so without risk of letting the tank go down. Whenever someone else in the party takes unexpected damage, the tank still has priority on your attention, seeing as you know for sure that they'll still be taking more damage, as well that is their role. If you are comfortable with your tank's HP, that is when you can divert your attention to healing other party members. There are tools that can make this much easier on you though. You can utilize your various healing abilities such as Essential Dignity, Lady of the Crowns, or even Earthly Star to heal the person who took unexpected damage. If the damage the tank is taking is really severe and you can't afford to stop your healing, or in cases where both tanks will be taking damage, this is the perfect opportunity to utilize Sinistry. Place this on the main tank and you'll be free to spot heal the rest of your party or the other tank while making sure the main tank is still getting some partial healing. As a healer, it is fairly important to be very perceptive and to pay attention to your party. It's a good habit to pay attention to your party members and their positions, as well as the various cooldowns they are using, especially the tank. Keeping track of what cooldowns your tank is using can let you know how lax or alert you need to be when keeping your tank healthy. If your tank is using their defensive cooldowns properly to mitigate damage and counter tank busters, then you shouldn't really have to exert yourself too much. However, if you find yourself with a tank that insists on pulling several packs altogether, goes into Deliverance to drop their decimates with nothing but anticipation up, then it's time for you to maybe prepare some of your own healing cooldowns and to be ready to use your more potent heals to counter the massive amount of damage the tank will be taking. When playing with players in the Duty Finder, it can be fairly commonplace to party with tanks who refuse to use their cooldowns at all. As frustrating as it is to deal with them, you should still compensate your abilities and attention to attempt to make each run as smooth as possible. Now of course you are an Astrologian, so while you're keeping track of your party's health and healing accordingly, you do still need to also divert some of your attention to your cards. When it comes to applying your cards in battle, I tend to use draw and then immediately go into my next GCD. This allows me time to look at the card I drew and gives me a couple seconds to decide how to use it. If I still haven't decided what to do with it by my next GCD, I tend to use another spell. This usually is enough time for me to decide how to use my card, and I do so accordingly. Now there will be some cases where the healing becomes just so intensive that you feel like you don't have time to handle your cards properly. It will happen and you can buckle under the pressure sometimes. No matter what you do though, you don't want to hold onto your card in your draw slot for too long. When in doubt, channel it into your Royal Road or Minor Arcana and get the next draw cooling down. Do not sit on cards for too long or you'll end up losing draws in the long scheme of things. So, in summary, attempt to cast Nocturnal Aspect of Benefic pre-pull. If you choose to stay in Nocturnal, use Aspect of Benefic to open up opportunities to deal DPS, to deal with large spikes in damage, or if you need a strong buffer in damage intensive phases to gain some extra time to get your other healing spells off. In Diurnal, use Aspect of Benefic to keep a constant amount of healing on your tank if MP is not an issue, and use your Benefic spells to supplement any damage that might outweigh the regen effect. In either sect, remember to fall back on your Benefic and Benefic 2 spells when Aspect of Benefic is not applicable. You can use healing buffs such as Largesse and Sinistry to help with healing in damage intensive moments, and both Essential Dignity and the Lady of the Crowns are great for catching up on healing where your spells may fall behind, or for spot healing someone who took unexpected damage. Moving on to AoE Healing, this is significantly more straightforward. When healing in Nocturnal Sect, you want to try your best to plan ahead for party-wide damage. Nocturnal Aspect of Helios is particularly useful when you have it up before incoming AoE damage. However, this does end up usually wasting the heal portion of the spell. Therefore, Aspect of Helios is more suited for phases in fights where there are multiple party-wide attacks going out in quick succession or constant party-wide damage going out so that both the heal and the shields are utilized. If you want, you can cast this in anticipation for the party spreading out to deal with mechanics that will cause them to take damage. However, when dealing with single large bursts in party-wide damage, if you can't get Aspect of Helios out in time for the shields to be effective, it is likely a better option to opt for a normal Helios cast or to utilize one of your abilities such as Earthly Star or Collective Unconscious. AoE healing in Diurnal Sect is fairly similar to how you would heal as a White Mage. Precasting is far more appropriate, and Diurnal Aspect of Helios is a great choice for healing a moderate to large amount of party-wide damage, and especially great against constant party-wide damage. A single Aspect of Helios cast, coupled with either a normal Helios or with an Earthly Star or Collective Unconscious, is usually all you should need unless the outgoing party-wide damage is extremely high. When it comes down to it, sometimes you might opt to not even touch your AoE healing spells at all. If you can set Earthly Star in advance to get its most potent use, the massive heal from this ability can usually heal up large amounts of damage just on its own. It also feels extremely satisfying to do so. Collective Unconscious counts as both damage mitigation for those who stand within your bubble, as well as a heal, as it will give everyone a regen. Any full party, you can also take into account what your co-healer may be casting, so having just this up can maybe be enough support to complement whatever spells or abilities your other healer may be using. In summary, Helios is a good and reliable choice for healing up small to moderate amount of party-wide damage, and is usually a good complement to any of the other healing options, should those options on their own not be enough. Nocturnal Aspect of Helios is best used before damage is taken or in phases where there will be repeated or constant party-wide damage. Diurnal Aspect of Helios is best used against large or constant amounts of party-wide damage and works well when pre-casted. Earthly Star is extremely potent if it can be set up beforehand, but even improvised to place and use near immediately can still be an extremely powerful heal, and Collective Unconscious can help mitigate some of the incoming damage for people who stand inside, and will also grant them a shorter regen to help to heal the damage they have taken. Okay, we've talked about a lot in this guide, but now it's time to talk about DPSing as an Astrologian. While DPS is not particularly mandatory for you to perform as a healer, it is still highly recommended and encouraged for you to do so. Adding your own DPS can help aid with making runs go faster and smoother, and can also help ease the burden on the party during DPS checks. It can be a little daunting at times, especially with how ambitious some tanks can get with their pulls, but I recommend practicing and getting comfortable with the constant flow of dealing damage, and then healing, and then back to DPS, and so on and so forth. Now, unfortunately, while Astrologian's healing and utility toolkits are quite amazing, Astrologian's personal DPS tools leave a lot to be desired. When it comes to DPS, your actual actions are fairly unremarkable. For single target DPS, it really is just as simple as applying Combust 2 and maintaining the dot every 30 seconds. With Combust 2 applied, go into Malefic 3 as filler. And that's really it. For AoE damage, use Gravity. Done. Now, you do have some abilities to spice things up a little at least. Cleric Stance is something that you should use, especially when you'll know you have plenty of opportunity to make the most of the 15-second buff. As mentioned earlier, you can pull off some pretty insane combination with your abilities. One of my favorites for AoE damage is to throw out some offensive cards on your DPS, pop Cleric Stance, Lightspeed, and Lucid Dreaming, and then extend everything with Celestial Opposition. This will essentially make you a gravity spamming machine, whilst simultaneously regaining your MP and reducing your MP consumption, while also extending the party buffs you just handed out to everyone and stunning all the enemies to act as some damage mitigation. There's a lot of effects that happen during this combination. Of course, this sort of thing can only be executed every couple minutes, but it is certainly quite satisfying to do so. If you will not need Earthly Star for a specific phase, it can be placed down for DPSing purposes. As mentioned earlier, it is particularly great to set down during large pulls, as it will be able to deal more DPS to a whole pack of enemies, and will also be a nice safety net that you'll be able to detonate at any time to give your tank a massive chunk of healing, even in its weakest form. And unfortunately, that's really it when it comes to Astrologian's DPS capabilities. A lot of your DPS potential actually comes from the sheer amount of offensive buffs that you can hand out to your party to increase their DPS. There is one thing I would like to bring back up though, and that is the greatness that is your Malefic spells. As I said earlier, Malefic is unique in that it is the only spell of its kind that has a base cast time of 1.5 seconds. This allows you to finish your cast slightly ahead of your GCD, and this allows you a bit of mobility without having to even utilize stutter stepping. More importantly though, it is so that you can use your abilities without clipping into your next GCD. And you have tons of abilities that you need to use on Astrologian. You have your healing oriented abilities and buffs, sure, but you also have your cards and the sheer amount of abilities that will manipulate them. And each form of Malefic allows you some breathing room to use all of those without having to sacrifice some precious time that could be spent casting spells. Now, that's not to say that you need to cast Malefic when you need to use an ability. There are other instant cast spells that offer even more time, such as Combust and Aspect of Benefic. Also, the use of Lightspeed pretty much opens up a ton of time to use abilities as well. And if you are currently in a healing intensive phase, it goes without saying that you should be focused on using your healing spells, than trying to squeeze in Malefic spells just so you can avoid GCD clipping. Just know that the slightly faster cast time of Malefic is there to help ease the sheer amount of abilities that you have at your disposal, and you should try and take advantage of this as much as possible. And obviously, no matter what, your healing takes type priority. Neglect your healing to deal DPS and then someone goes down? Well, that's going to be an overall bigger loss in DPS. So, DPS when it is appropriate, but also be smart and not overextend yourself and fail at your actual role which is a healer. Okay, we've talked about healing, we've talked about DPS, now let's talk a little bit about MP management and conservation. Out of the 3 healers, I personally find that Astrologian has the most difficult time maintaining a healthy amount of MP. I feel like a lot of this stems from 2 major things. The first being that Astrologians only have Lucid Dreaming to replenish their MP, with the chance of using the Ur card to give them a little bit of extra MP. We can at the least pair Lucid Dreaming with Celestial Opposition to gain an additional 3 ticks of MP refresh, and I highly encourage attempting to do so every time. But unlike White Mage and Scholar, Astrologian has no way of regaining a percentage of their total MP once a minute like those 2 healers. The second major reason why I suspect Astrologians have more MP issues is the alluring nature of Aspected Benefic. It is just too easy to cast this spell. It is instant cast and it is extremely powerful. I often find myself casting this when I want to continue healing but need to reposition myself, and while this spell is amazing, it does cost a hefty amount of MP, and using it too often can lead to dry MP reserves. For these reasons, it is important to monitor your MP closely. Your MP regain without any external aid from things such as mana shift from casters or refresh from ranged DPS comes in a big burst every couple of minutes. If you see that Lucid is close to coming off cooldown, then by all means let loose a bit. But if you're noticing that you're running low on MP and you're still quite some time away from your next Lucid, I would advise holding back. It is not particularly ideal for you to be idle and not casting anything, but if you're going to run yourself into a position where you are low or completely out of MP to heal because you didn't want to stop casting, then you will find yourself not being able to heal and people will start dying, and then the party might wipe, and then it will all snowball into something much worse. If you need to heal and still want to try and conserve your MP because you're running low, then using Benefic when and where you can is the ideal choice for the most efficient use of your MP. Of course, if Benefic is not able to cut it on its own, still use your more hefty spells, but when it comes to conserving your MP, Benefic is the best choice, hands down. The use of Largesse or Sinistry can make even the basic Benefic much more potent, and these abilities can be spread out during a fight to help get the most out of your MP throughout a fight. Now of course we can't talk about MP management without talking about Lightspeed. Lightspeed is an amazing tool in many ways, as we've discussed before. It is great for reacting quickly to damage, great for mobility, and great at conserving your MP. Even if you do not choose to use it with Celestial Opposition to double its duration, you can still output your best spells at half cost. This is especially helpful for when you want to output multiple AoE healing spells. That being said, as long as you moderate the uses of Aspected Benefic, make good utilization of your healing abilities, especially in place of AoE heals where you can, and fall back on Benefic sometimes, you should be able to maintain a healthy amount of MP throughout a fight. Receiving some help through the use of refresh from ranged DPS can also make a huge difference as well, although that depends entirely on how your party members utilize their abilities. Just be smart and try and make sure that you have enough MP to finish a fight. Okay, we're nearing the end of the guide, but before we close things out, let's take a look at the stats and which you should prioritize. When it comes to your main stats, weapon damage shall trump all, with mind being a second to that. Weapon damage and mind will naturally increase with item level, so it goes without saying that you should try and equip your highest item level gear. When it comes to choosing from 2 pieces of gear that have the identical item levels, or deciding what you would like to meld onto your gear, this is where you should pay attention to your secondary stats. So let's look at those now. We'll talk about Piety first. This is a healer specific stat that will simply increase your maximum MP pool. This does have other benefits than simply allowing you to start a fight with more MP. You'll passively gain 2% of your max MP every few seconds in battle, and that goes up to 6% outside of battle. So the higher your max MP, the more MP you can regain, although this amount is not very clear or tangible. Since Astrologians also do not have any abilities that grant them a percentage of their MP on use, like White Mages and Scholars have, this stat is further docked and less useful for Astrologians in particular. Piety is certainly nice to have, but the other stats will provide better and more tangible support. Next is Spell Speed. This will reduce the cast time of your spells and will also increase the effectiveness of your damage over time and healing over time effects. Spell speed is not very useful on Astrologian. The reduction in cast times is certainly nice, however it takes a massive amount of spell speed to make a noticeable difference in cast times. Also, in Astrologian's case, you do have access to many abilities to help bypass cast times. You have instant cast healing abilities in the forms of Essential Dignity and Lady of the Crowns. Early Start takes a bit more prep, but it can act as a form of a near instant AoE heal when needed. And you also have access to Swift Cast and even to a larger extent the amazing Light Speed. The ability to increase the effectiveness of your healing over time and damage over time abilities sound nice, but other stats will do that as well as increase the effectiveness of your entire toolkit. So spell speed is generally a weak choice for Astrologian. Determination will very simply increase the effectiveness of your healing as well as your damage dealt by a small amount. You can think of Determination as a lesser scaling version of Mind, and this simplicity makes it a very straightforward and ultimately a solid choice when it comes to secondary stats. Critical hit rate will increase your chance to critically heal or deal damage with your spells and abilities. Having more critical hit rate will also increase, well, the increase in damage or healing when you land a crit. Critical hit rate is far less reliable and more random than Determination, but it is still a solid choice for both healing and DPS. You won't ever be casting your heals and gambling that it will crit, and you should continue to use your toolkit accordingly to assume that you will never crit. But when you do crit, those crit heals may help catch you up on healing, and crit damage is always helpful. It is not very super consistent at all, but it will overall benefit you over the course of a fight. Vitality will increase your maximum HP. This will appear on left side healer gear, however it is not present on your accessories, so you can choose to meld these into your accessories if you choose, with the exception of your belt. As for the benefits of Vitality, it can be nice to have more HP, I suppose. There are a handful of abilities that are more effective depending on how much maximum HP you have, such as Divine Benison. But the main benefit of Vitality is to simply have a larger HP pool to soak damage. This can be useful for just barely surviving an attack, although these moments are still fairly rare. Still, it's not a useless choice, and if you don't find much merit in the other available stats, it might save your life a few times. And the final stat worth discussing is direct hit rate. This will allow you to directly hit or directly crit your enemy with damaging spells, but it will not affect your heals in any way. Because your heals receive no benefit from direct hit, I personally do not recommend focusing on this stat. However, if you wish to employ a very aggressive approach and focus on dealing lots of DPS, this can be an ideal choice for you. At the very least, I recommend melding at least one direct hit meld somewhere into your gear so that you at least have the ability to perform a direct hit. And tenacity does not affect healers at all, so ignore this stat. So how would I recommend you prioritize your stats? Well, like I said before, prioritize item level for weapon damage in mind. For your secondary stats, I personally recommend focusing on either Determination or critical hit rate, whichever you prefer more. After those two stats, I'd say that Piety is nice to have, but not necessary. Spell speed is fairly weak in comparison to everything else. Vitality is again nice to have, but not necessary. And as for direct hit rate, I recommend having at least one direct hit meld somewhere in your gear, but would not otherwise recommend this stat. If you want to play aggressively and DPS a lot, direct hit is still viable, but I would still prefer critical hit rate or Determination over it, as it will affect the entirety of my spells and abilities and not just my DPS. And those are my stances on these stats. And with that, we've covered all of the main topics I've wanted to cover in this guide. We made it. I just have a handful of closing thoughts to leave you with. First off, I would like to thank you for watching the guide. The fact that you're here watching this guide means that you have a desire to learn and improve as a player, and that is something I commend and respect you for. As a fellow healer, I can say that it can be tough to play a healer in this game. Being a good healer requires a lot of foresight and perception. It requires you to take a lot of responsibility and to be flexible. When people want to do large pulls, when tanks want to turn off their tank stance, when DPS want to take damage to maintain uptime, it all puts more stress and pressure on you as a healer to perform well. Where people make mistakes, you can fix them, and a good healer can be the difference between a close save and a wipe. And a lot of this work and effort can oftentimes go unnoticed. For the less perceptive player, they won't even notice all of the nice plays and saves that you will make throughout a fight to ensure that things go smoothly and that people do not go down. Some people will sit there and scoff about how simple and easy a healer is to play, or how boring it is to heal without really understanding what it means to heal. It can be frustrating at times, but if you enjoy healing, then practice, get better at it, and become a healer so great that those people will be forced to admit how amazing you are as a healer. And that's all I got. Thank you all again for watching. If you've been waiting for this guide for a while, then thank you also for waiting patiently, and I hope that it helped you on your way to playing the Astrologian. If you enjoyed the guide and want to see more, I do have a White Mage guide that is done as well, and I shall post that in the description of the video, or you can click the eye icon in the top right of the video. Consider leaving a like and maybe subscribing and checking out all of the other content that I post. I play a lot of Final Fantasy XIV and have various series that I do on the game, as well as trying to branch out and play other games that I feel like playing at the time as well. So stick around if that sounds enjoyable, or if you like me as a person, I guess. I am on the Aether Data Center and the Faerie server in case you would like to chat with me in-game, and my characters are listed in the description below. Alright, I think that's all the stuff I needed to say. Thanks again for watching, hopefully you learned something useful, good luck on playing Astrologian, and I'll see you all in another video. Sayonara, bye bye.